Welcome back to the channel. Today we had one of those dreaded problems, the intermittent problem. This one happens to be an intermittent misfire, and it's a 2009 Ford Escape with the, I believe it's a 3-liter. It's got 6 cylinders, so something like that. Anyway, little history on this car. This is the second time I've had it. First time, the owner called me up, said check engine light was flashing and the car was running rough. No problem, definitely a misfire. He brought it to me, and by the time I got it, everything was fine. It was running nice and smooth. I did pull a code out of it for cylinder 4, so we know that the cylinder 4 is misfire, and at least it was at that time. So I said, you know what, just take it back home with you and bring it back to me when it's doing it again, and we'll figure it out. And it took about 2 weeks, called me up, said it's misfiring again. So he brought it to me. Of course, by the time I get it, it's running smooth. Now, I'm not gonna keep repeating this cycle, so we're going to see if we can figure out a way to diagnose or at least narrow down some of the problems for next time. So I'm gonna show you how I came up with a way to do that. So these things are known for bad coils and bad injectors. So it's probably one of those two things, although it could be anything from a mechanical problem with the engine itself internally, although since it comes and goes, probably not it. It could be a bad computer, could be a bad wiring harness to any one of those, the injector or the coil. Not likely, since I said it comes and goes. So I'm leaning towards maybe a bad injector or a bad coil. Now, I don't want to just throw both of those parts at it because this thing probably shouldn't be on the road much longer. Transmission is not doing so hot, and the frame rails in the back of this thing are, well, non-existent, and it's only a matter of time before the wheel wells in the back are completely rotted out. So this thing doesn't have much time left. We don't want to dump a bunch of money into it if we don't have to. So I came up with a way to try to determine what our problem is and do it as cheap as possible. I already have the air box off here because I already did everything. I'm just going to tell you what I did. So we lucked out, and our cylinder 4 is right here. This is 4, 5, 6. So we know that we have a problem over here. So what I did was I took the fuel injector from here and I put it over here. So we moved it to cylinder 5. I took number 5 and put it over here. Now we have a known good fuel injector, and they're all the same. So now if our problem goes over to cylinder 5, we know that we have a problem in our fuel injector. I took the coil and the plug from cylinder 4 and put it in cylinder 6, and then took cylinder 6 and put it in cylinder 4. So if our problem moves over to cylinder 6, we know that we have a bad plug or coil, which I changed together anyway, so it doesn't really matter. If our problem moves here, we got a bad injector. If our problem stays on cylinder 4, either we broke one of the parts we changed over here, or our problem is maybe a wiring harness, computer, something else. It's going to take a lot more work. But basically all we're doing is testing our cylinder here with known good parts because our parts were working in the other cylinders, so we just moved everything around. So I'm going to give it back to the customer and let him drive it around for a while, and we'll see what happens in the rest of this video. So good news, it didn't take long before the light came back on. Of course, by the time I got it, it was running fine again, but we have a problem on a different cylinder, which is great news because that means our problem moved, which means it's one of the parts that we changed already. And it moved to cylinder 5, meaning it's a bad fuel injector. So we're gonna go ahead and swap out a fuel injector. I got a brand new one, so we're gonna throw that in here, and that should take care of our problem. And because it's up in the front there, we don't have to pull the intake, makes it a nice quick job. That's pretty much the same way I did it the last time, but this time I'm actually going to show you how I did it. So let's get that done. To get to the top half of the motor, we need to remove the air box and the intake tube. So we'll disconnect the mass airflow sensor and the little clip that holds the harness in. Spin the clamp off the throttle body. We're just going to take this little snorkel with the air box. Some push pins with the centers up. Not all the way out like I did. We'll put it back in later. Some rubber grommets that it sits on top of the engine, so just pull it off of there. And there's one breather hose on the bottom. Just unclip that.
And now we can see our fuel rail. So we'll unbolt this side of it. We're going to sneak back here. There's one more bolt that holds the other side of the fuel rail. Actually, there's two, but we're not going to take the last one off because it's underneath the intake. We're just going to cheat. We're not even going to remove this one all the way. We're just going to give ourselves a little bit of room to work. Break it free and then spin it out of there with our fingers. Now we can pull our fuel rail up a little bit. And we get to our injector. Plug the harness first. And pop the little clip off. And attempt not to lose it in Narnia. Yeah, it's probably a bad idea to leave it there, so we'll put it up on the intake. Just push our injector out. Should come out pretty easy. We just put it in there. And we're going to rinse the top of the engine with a little bit of gas. And there's our injector. We'll grab our new one. Pull the little plastic caps off the end of it. And put a little oil on the O-ring so it slides up into our fuel rail without tearing up the O-ring. Before we put the injector on, we'll put the little clip on it. You can put them on afterwards, but you just clip that clip on now. You just push the injector up on there and it'll snap in place. A lot easier than trying to get your fingers in there and clip it on later. Now the hardest part. Getting it lined up in the fuel rail. There's just enough room to sneak it in there. We'll push it up in the fuel rail and it should clip in. I'd have to rotate it a little bit to clip it all the way in. So before we push our fuel rail down where it belongs in the intake, it's easier to plug it in now. Not a lot of room for that plug once it's where it belongs. So we'll get it plugged in. Line up all of our injectors. Just we got to make sure it's all the way in there. And slide it down in there. We can start our bolts. And zip them down in there. Tighten them down to manufacturer's spec. Get to that one in the back. Spin it down as far as we can with our fingers. Now I'll sneak our ratchet in here with our extension and swivel and tighten it down the rest of the way so that hopefully it never comes out of there again. It's a little bit of struggle to do it this way, but it's a whole lot less struggle than pulling the whole intake off and having to buy a gasket set. So we'll spend a few extra seconds here and save us a few minutes in the long run and save the customer some money. We can throw our air box and air tube back on here. Clip in that breather down below. Plug in our mass airflow sensor harness. And plug in the mass airflow sensor. Flip it down in those little tabs on top of the intake. Push our little push pins in for the snorkel. And tighten up the boot on the throttle body. Start it up and make sure it's not leaking, and if it's not, we should be done.
So we've had it running, and that's a pretty straight line for the power balance, so usually they're a little noisy. And if you want to see what a bad injector looks like, we'll turn off number 5. And that's what it shows like on the power balance. It's not contributing at all. Turn it back on. So it's fixed, at least for right now. Figured I'd give you guys a little peek at the frame rail, or lack thereof. Somehow, the wheel wells are not all routed out like they usually are, but I would imagine that isn't much further behind. Here's the other side. I hope it doesn't get rear-ended by a shopping cart. So I'm going to take the little Escape for a ride and hope that the back end of the car doesn't fall off. And then I'll give it back to the customer, and I shouldn't see him for a while, and hopefully never again with this vehicle. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.